Hi there, welcome to the latest of my 10-minute moans, and the topic of this 10-minute moan is a little unusual. It's a history lesson about the SNP and their ties to Nazi Germany. So today I'm going to talk about, instead of celebrating triumphs in Scottish histories, this one lingers like a fog over the Highlands, obscured by decades of selective memory and political revisionism. We speak often of the valours of the Scots in the fight against tyranny during the Second World War, the 51st Highland Division at El Alamein, the Commandos at St Nazaire, the unyielding spirit that helped forge Allied victory. But what if I told you that amid that heroism, a faction within Scotland's nationalist movement gazed across the channel not with defiance, but with desperate optimism? What if an element of the Scottish National Party and its forebearers sought alliance with the very architects of the Holocaust, the regime that plunged Europe into an abyss? This is not a tale of conspiracy, but of documented fact, unearthed from declassified MI5 files, intercepted cables, and the candid admissions of the era's own actors. It is a story of the SNP's ties to Nazi Germany during World War II. A betrayal just not of Britain, but of the democratic ideals Scotland claims to cherish. Let's peel back the layers of myth and examine this uncomfortable truth. For in history's mirror, we see not only our past, but the perils of nationalism unchecked. To understand this entanglement, we must first journey to the interwar years, the 1930s, when Europe tethered on the brink. The Great Depression ravaged Scotland's shipyards and coal mines, breeding resentment towards Westminster's English overlords. Into this fertile ground sprang the Scottish National Party in 1934. Born from the merger of the National Party of Scotland and the Scottish Party, it was a motley coalition. Romantics dreaming of Burns and Bannockburn, intellectuals railing against unionist complacency, and a fringe of ideologues drawn to the siren song of authoritarianism sweeping the continent. Fascism, that virulent strain of ultranationalism, found echoes in unexpected places. Mussolini's black shirts in Italy promised order and glory. Hitler's Nazis in Germany exalted the Volk. The pure national spirit, and in Scotland, a cadre of SNP early leaders and sympathisers flirted perilously close to those flames. Consider Andrew Henderson Gibb, the party's first chairman from 1936 to 1940. A brilliant but troubled academic. Gibb's diaries reveal a man who viewed Nazism as the bulwark against communism, sharing its anti-Semitic anxieties, even if he recoiled at the first final solution's barbarity. He admired the Nazis' racial purity rhetoric, seeing in it a model of revitalised Scottish identity, free from alien influences. Gibb offered his resignation in 1939,
as Europe militarised,
openly declaring his distinct fascist leanings. At an Edinburgh party meeting, quipping that he didn't care who wins the impending war. Nor was Gibb alone. The poet Hugh MacDiarmid, a towering figure in the Scottish Renaissance literature and an early SNP enthusiast, penned essays in the 1920s calling for Scottish fascism to shatter the spiritual stagnation of unionism. By 1929, he advocated for Clan Alben, a paramilitary clan of nationalists armed to seize independence by force. Though MacDiarmid later veered leftward, expelled from the SNP in 1933 for communist sympathies, his early flirtation tainted the party's intellectual wing, blending Celtic romanticism with fascist vigour. These were not aberrations, but symptoms of a broader malaise. As Europe militarised, Scottish nationalists debated the war implications in hushed tones. The SNP split in 1942. One faction, led by John McCormick, backed the Allied effort and devolution. The other, under the fiery Professor Douglas Young, decried conscription as Westminster's tyranny and urged Scots to refuse the call-up. Young, imprisoned for his defiance, was vilified in the press as a saboteur of the fight against Hitler. His rhetoric, England's difficulty, is Scotland's opportunity. In private, he mused that a Nazi stormtrooper might prove more honest than the British, and that Hitler invasions could dissipate the migraine of imperial partnership with England. This was no mere pacifism. It was calculated, a gamble on Axis victory to carve out a Celtic Reich. But words alone do not a pact make. The true scandal unfolds in the shadows of espionage and intercepted signals. Proof that SNP-linked radicals didn't just admire the Nazis from afar, they courted them as allies. In 1940 and again in August 1943, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, those unsung heroes who cracked the enigma, they intercepted desperate pleas from a group styling itself the Scottish Nationalists or Scottish Independence Movement. Via the German legation in neutral Dublin, these rebels proposed a Faustian bargain. In exchange for sparing Scotland from the Luftwaffe's wrath, the Nazis would arm a Republican uprising during the impending attack on England. War material and Irish Republican operatives, versed in guerrilla tactics, would flood north from Ireland, exploiting the chaos to proclaim a Scottish Republic while London burned. The memo relayed to Berlin by Dr. Edward Hempel, the legation's chief, dripped with ideological fervour. It framed the alliance as national Christian socialism against the gross materialism of the capitalistic Communist Union of England, American and Bolsheviks, etc. Demands included German broadcasts to stir Scottish unrest, echoing Lord Haw-Haw William Joyce's venomous airwaves, and the segregation of Scottish prisoners of war from English ones, to foment division in the camps. Hempel himself, entangled with the IRA's sabotage plots, forwarded names of 2 reliable members of the Scottish Nationalist Party on the continent, and even details of an oil pipeline along the Caledonian Canal, ripe for disruption. Who were these renegade nationalists? Declassified MI5 files point squarely at Arthur Donaldson, a founding SNP member from 1934 and its future leader from 1960 to 1969. In 1941, police raided Donaldson's Ayrshire farm, uncovering 5 revolvers, ammunition, fascist literature, and a letter to a Nazi agent. Dr. Gerhard von Taverner, MI5's dossier, branded him as Scottish Quisling, plotting a Vinci-style puppet regime under Nazi oversight. Donaldson confessed to a British informant of a network undermining the war effort, envisioning Scotland spared famine and poverty while England crumbled. The government would leave the country, he schemed, and England's position would be absolutely hopeless. Interned under the Defence Regulation 18B, Donaldson later downplayed it as wartime tittle-tattle. But the evidence, guns, letters, intercepted plots, speaks volumes. And this was no isolated folly. The Nazis themselves fanned the flames with Radio Caledonia, a Goebbels orchestrated propaganda station beaming from Germany in 1940 and 1941. Posing as a Scottish voice, it targeted patriots with tales of Westminster's neglect, urging rebellion against the Sassenach yoke. Its Scottish presenter, Donald Grant, a disgruntled nationalist, scripted appeals to Caledonians' sons, strikes in the shipyards, sabotage in the mines. Though the SNP's mouthpiece, the Scots Independent, warned against it as a risk to the cause. The broadcasts preyed on genuine grievances, wartime rationing, conscription quotas, to sow discord. Professor Murray Pittock of Glasgow University notes it would have appealed to some Scottish nationalists feeling sidelined in the People's War. And the IRA link, profoundly ironic given today's alliances. The Scottish plotters had already forged an alliance with Irish Republicans per MI6 intercepts, blending Celtic separatism with Axis opportunism. Winston Churchill, apoplectic at Irish neutrality, fumed in a 1943 memo. Their conduct will never be forgiven by the British nation unless amended. Yet, here were Scots, kin to the Irish in grievance, whispering treason to the same Berlin paymasters. Why does this matter, you ask? In the grand arc of history, there were fringe voices in a party of 10,000 members, their plots thwarted by Allied resolve. The SNP itself backed the war in editorials, framing it as a defence of small nations against fascism. The SNP, Donaldson, was released in 1944. Young pivoted post-war, and the party clawed to relevance in the 1950s. Yet the stain endures, not as a blanket indictment of modern nationalism, but as a stark warning. For in the 1930s, fascism seduced not just stormtroopers in Munich, but idealists in Edinburgh, promising national rebirth through authoritarian fire. It thrived in division. Us versus them, Scots versus Sassenach, mirroring Hitler's Jew-baiting or Mussolini's imperial delusions. Today, as populist shadows lengthen across Europe, from Le Pen's France to Orban's Hungary, we see echoes. Nationalism, untethered from pluralism, risks veering into xenophobia, where independence justifies isolation or worse. The SNP of 2025 disavows this past, touting civic inclusivity and EU fealty. But history demands reckoning. How many fringe ideas unchecked birthed monsters? As David Starkey controversially noted in 2015, likening the SNP's fervour to National Socialism. The parallels in ethnocentric rhetoric sting because they resonate. Goodwin's law be damned. The 1930s teach that Goodwin was often right. So, the SNP's Nazi ties were not the whole of Scottish nationalism, nor the sum of its people. They were a fevered dream of desperation, a betrayal born of resentment, shattered by the courage of millions, including Scots, who stormed Normandy's beaches. But to ignore them is to court repetition. Let us honour the true heroes, not the plotters in Dublin, but the codebreakers in Bletchley, the factory hands in Clydebank, and the poets who chose liberty over fascism. And as we forge ahead, may Scotland's saltire fly not in isolation, but in solidarity, a beacon against the dark. Because, and remember in the shadows, we illuminate the light. If you want others to see this video, click the thumbs up put your comments below and hit the share button. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. But most important than all of that, unless you're the type of person that puts your quest for nationalism in Scotland over every other item, then be warned. And not you, but everyone else, have a great day. Cheery bye now.